It started with a crackling sound in the blizzard, something sharp like the snapping of brittle bones. The radio had long since died, leaving me alone with the rhythmic thud of my tires against the snowy road. Christmas Eve was supposed to feel magical, but tonight the darkness felt alive. The snow falling against my windshield seemed heavier, almost deliberate, as if trying to trap me. I was driving to my parents' house in rural New Hampshire, later than I'd planned. The office Christmas party had dragged on, and by the time I hit the highway, it was well past 9. My GPS glowed faintly on the dashboard, guiding me through the winding back roads, promising an arrival just after 11 p.m. But something felt wrong tonight. The barren fields outside, draped in white, seemed too empty. The skeletal outlines of trees looked like jagged hands reaching for the car. Even the hum of the heater did little to chase the creeping unease clawing at my thoughts. An hour into the drive, the fuel gauge blinked. I cursed under my breath. I'd forgotten to fill up before leaving Boston and wouldn't make it to my parents' house without stopping. My GPS showed the nearest gas station, a tiny dot labeled Tom's Pump and Go, 10 miles away. It wasn't ideal. Rural stations were often closed on holidays, but I didn't have much choice. The road narrowed as I turned off the main route, the trees pressing in closer. Snowflakes swirled like ghosts in the headlights, and the silence of the night was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, a dimly lit sign emerged from the blizzard, swinging on a rusted pole. Tom's Pump and Go. A single pump stood under a flickering light. The building beside it was squat, windowless and uninviting. The place looked like it hadn't seen life in decades, but a faint glow inside suggested it was still open. I pulled up next to the pump, shivering as I stepped out into the biting cold. The snow muffled every sound, and the crunch of my boots felt unnaturally loud. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a cramped interior cluttered with dusty snacks and faded road maps. Behind the counter sat a wiry man in his late 50s, his thinning hair plastered to his scalp. He glanced up from a newspaper, his pale blue eyes locking onto mine with unsettling intensity. "Help you?" he asked in a flat, emotionless tone. "Just need to fill up," I replied, pulling out my wallet. "Pump's prepaid. How much you want?" $40 should do it, I said, handing him the cash. He rang me up silently, sliding the receipt across the counter without another word. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A stack of small, neatly wrapped Christmas gifts piled in the corner. Each box was labeled with the same name, Evan. "Nice gifts," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Big family." The man's expression darkened. "None of your business," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Outside, the snow had thickened into a near whiteout. I hurried to the pump, fumbling with the nozzle as the wind bit at my face. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, almost lost in the howling wind. At first I thought it was just the storm, but then it came again. A muffled scream. I froze, my hand tightening around the nozzle. The sound was faint but distinct, a woman's voice pleading. My pulse quickened as I strained to locate the source. It was coming from behind the building. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car and leave, but something about the desperation in that voice anchored me in place. Against my better judgment, I crept around the side of the building. The snow-covered path led to a narrow, darkened door. It was slightly ajar, and through the crack I could hear muffled cries growing louder. "Please don't," a woman's voice pleaded, her words choked with sobs. "Shut up," a gruff male voice growled. "Nobody's coming for you." My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for my phone, but the screen showed no signal. Swallowing hard, I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The cries grew louder, each one clawing at my nerves. I couldn't just walk away. I descended slowly, each step creaking under my weight. At the bottom, a dimly lit room came into view. A young woman, no older than her mid-20s, was tied to a chair. Her face was bruised, her tear-streaked eyes wide with terror. A burly man loomed over her, his back to me, muttering something cruel. Without thinking, I grabbed a rusty wrench from a nearby workbench. My grip tightened as adrenaline surged through me. Before he could react, I swung the wrench with all my strength, connecting with the side of his head. He collapsed with a guttural grunt, and the woman let out a muffled scream behind her gag. "I'm here to help," I whispered, rushing to untie her. Her hands were trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, and I helped her to her feet. Behind us, the man groaned, starting to stir. "Go!" I urged, practically dragging her up the stairs. We burst out into the blizzard, the icy wind slamming into us like a wall. I shoved her into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. As I peeled out of the lot, headlights illuminated the wiry clerk running out of the building, a shotgun in his hands. The car fishtailed on the icy road, but I managed to regain control, speeding away into the night. For miles, neither of us spoke. The woman sat shaking, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible, but the gratitude in it was unmistakable. We reached the next town, where I pulled into a well-lit diner and called the police. She told her story while we waited. She'd been abducted from a nearby rest stop earlier that evening. The man and the clerk had planned to kill her after their fun. My stomach churned at the thought. The police arrested both men later that night. Evidence in the basement tied them to several unsolved disappearances in the area. I spent Christmas morning at the police station, giving statements and trying to process what had happened. When I finally reached my parents' house, their hugs felt warmer than ever. But even now, years later, every Christmas Eve brings it all rushing back. That silent, sinister night. And sometimes, in the stillness of winter, I think I can still hear that faint, muffled scream. It wasn't the storm that made my house feel cold that Christmas Eve. It was something else. The kind of chill that settles into your bones, creeping under your skin until even the glow of the holiday candles feels hollow. The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows, while snow clung to the panes like ghostly hands trying to claw their way in. Inside, everything was eerily quiet, too quiet. I prepared a simple Christmas dinner, trying to inject some holiday spirit into an otherwise lonely night. The table was set for one. The tree lights flickered weakly as if the storm outside drained their strength. I just sat down, fork hovering over my plate, when it happened. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the house, it felt thunderous. My heart stopped mid-beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. Who would be out in this storm? I froze, straining to hear more, but the only sound was the wind shrieking against the eaves. Slowly I rose and made my way to the door. The hallway stretched out before me, shadowy and foreboding. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment too long. When I finally opened the door, icy wind lashed at my face. There was no one there. Just the storm, the darkness, and a package. It sat neatly on the welcome mat, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a tattered red ribbon that fluttered weakly in the wind. No return address, no delivery tag, just a package. For a long moment I stared at it. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just the timing or the mystery of who could have left it. It was the package itself. It seemed too deliberate, too personal. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and brought it inside. The air inside the house felt heavier now, like the walls were closing in. A faint smell clung to the package, sweet and cloying like perfume mixed with something metallic. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just a misplaced delivery, but my hands trembled as I set it on the table. I hesitated, staring at the ribbon for what felt like hours before I finally untied it. The brown paper peeled away easily, revealing something that made my stomach lurch. A sweater, blood-soaked. The red stains were fresh, the fabric still damp. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. The sweet metallic scent was stronger now, suffocating. My mind raced as panic set in. Nestled beside the sweater was a crumpled piece of paper. its edges torn and smeared with blood. My shaking hands unfolded it to reveal jagged, messy handwriting. "This was for you. Merry Christmas." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My vision blurred as dread coursed through me. The room seemed darker now, the shadows on the walls deeper, moving, almost alive. Who would send me this? Why? I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but my hands were trembling so much it slipped from my grip. When I finally managed to dial, the operator's calm voice did little to ease my panic. They said someone would be dispatched, but the storm had delayed everything. It could take hours. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited. The sweater sat on the table like a silent threat, its blood-soaked presence dominating the room. The note taunted me. My mind churned with questions I couldn't answer. Was someone watching me? Were they still out there, hiding in the storm? When the police finally arrived, the storm had lessened, but the dread hadn't. The officers treated it like some bizarre prank at first, but their expressions darkened when they saw the blood. They took the sweater, the note, and the package, promising to investigate. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every howl of the wind made my heart leap. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there waiting. The next morning, the police called with an update. The blood was human, fresh, but it didn't match any known profiles in their database. There was no crime scene nearby, no missing persons report that aligned with the sweater's size or the blood's origin. They had no leads. Their words were meant to reassure me, but they didn't. Keep an eye out for anything unusual, they said. But everything felt unusual now. My home, once warm and familiar, felt like a stranger. Days turned into weeks, and the police investigation faded into silence. But for me, the fear lingered. Every time I walked past my door, I imagined another package waiting. Every Christmas since, I've found myself listening for that knock, bracing for the moment the nightmare returns. Because deep down, I know whoever sent that package wasn't finished. The soft glow of Christmas lights flickered through the frosted windows, casting shimmering reflections across my living room. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the quiet suburban street in an eerie stillness. It was the kind of night that felt safe, comforting even, but safety, as I would learn, was just an illusion. I just returned from my parents' holiday dinner, carrying with me the warmth of laughter and holiday cheer. Alone now, I poured a glass of wine and nestled into the couch, watching the lights twinkle on my Christmas tree. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. A buzz from my phone on the coffee table interrupted the calm. My home security app notified me of motion in the driveway. I dismissed it at first, assuming it was a passing animal or maybe a neighbor's car kicking up the snow. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the camera feed. There he was. A man stood near my car, his flashlight flickering as he leaned in to peer through the windows. His thick jacket and hood concealed most of his face, but the predatory way he moved made my stomach twist. I tapped the microphone on the app and forced my voice to sound firm, though my heart was pounding. "Can I help you?" He froze, slowly turning off the flashlight. For a moment, he just stood there, his hooded head tilted as if considering something. Then, without a word, he walked out of view. Relief flooded through me. Maybe I had scared him off. I locked the doors and windows just to be sure and tried to settle back into the evening, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the unease. About half an hour later, the silence was shattered. A deafening crash came from the back of the house. My wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Ice-cold dread gripped me as I rushed toward the noise. The back door's glass panel was obliterated, shards scattered across the kitchen tiles. Cold wind howled through the opening, and in the snow beyond, footprints trailed into the house. Panic set in. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. "Someone's in my house," I whispered to the operator, my voice barely audible. "Find a safe place to hide," she instructed, her tone calm but urgent. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line. I bolted to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My mind raced as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed. The operator stayed with me, her words meant to reassure, but they couldn't drown out the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps moving through my house. "Can you still hear him?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I whispered back, clutching the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside my bedroom door. The doorknob rattled. I held my breath, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Police are almost there," the operator said. The rattling turned into banging. Each slam against the door made the wood groan. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the bat, ready for the moment the door gave way. "Police are on their way!" I screamed, my voice cracking. But he didn't stop. He rammed the door harder, snarling curses under his breath. The frame splintered, and I braced myself for the worst. Suddenly shouts erupted from outside, sharp, commanding voices that cut through the chaos. "Police, hands in the air!" The banging stopped. There was a scuffle, a muffled curse, and then silence. Minutes later, an officer knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it cautiously, relief washing over me at the sight of uniforms. The intruder was gone, but not for long. They found him hiding in a nearby shed, armed with a knife and carrying zip ties in his backpack. "You were lucky," one of the officers told me. "Lucky?" That night I learned how fragile the sense of safety truly is. How quickly the walls of comfort can shatter. Even on a silent, snow-draped Christmas Eve, danger lurks closer than we think. The snow fell silently, blanketing the countryside in an eerie stillness. It was Christmas Eve, the kind of night that feels both magical and unnervingly quiet. But as I drove home from my late shift at the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The roads were deserted, the world around me suffocated by the heavy quiet of falling snow. Then I saw him. A man stood at the edge of the road, his silhouette illuminated by my headlights. His arms waved frantically, cutting through the darkness like a desperate signal. My pulse quickened as I slowed down. He was bundled in a worn jacket, a tattered duffel bag slumped at his feet. For a moment I hesitated. My parents had always warned me never to pick up strangers, especially at night. But it was Christmas Eve, and the thought of leaving someone stranded in the cold gnawed at me. I rolled down the window slightly, just enough to hear him over the hum of my heater. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice cautious. "Car broke down about a mile back," he said, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Just need a lift to the nearest gas station." He didn't look particularly threatening, just tired and freezing. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Hop in," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," he muttered, grabbing his bag and sliding into the passenger seat. As I pulled back onto the road, the man clutched his duffel bag like it held something precious or dangerous. His hands trembled, though whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. "Heading home for Christmas?" I asked, hoping to break the awkward silence. "Yeah," he said flatly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. His response was clipped, and the tension in the car thickened with every passing second. Something about him felt wrong. "How far is the gas station?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Not far," he replied, his voice low, almost a growl. The road stretched darker and emptier ahead, the cheerful glow of Christmas lights far behind us. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. "You know what?" I said suddenly, trying to sound nonchalant. "I just remembered I need to stop by a friend's house first. Won't take long." His eyes narrowed. "You're not taking me to the gas station, are you?" The accusation hung in the air, cold and sharp. My heart thundered in my chest, but I forced a laugh. "It's just a quick stop," I said. I turned onto a side street leading to a small neighborhood, the kind where houses sat close together, glowing with festive lights. My eyes darted to a house with a car in the driveway and a porch light on. "This is it," I said, pulling into the driveway and throwing the car into park. He didn't move. His grip on the duffel bag tightened and his gaze bore into me. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and cold. Ignoring him, I flung open the car door and sprinted to the porch. I knocked loudly, pretending I knew the people inside. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The man got out of the car, adjusted his bag, and stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the shadows. I stood frozen on the porch until the door opened and a startled woman peered out. I quickly explained what had happened, and she let me use her phone to call the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the area but found no trace of the man. They also checked the stretch of road where he'd claimed his car had broken down. There was nothing. I drove home that night, shaken and uneasy. The memory of his bruised knuckles and the way he clutched that bag burned into my mind. I still don't know what was inside that duffel bag or what he had planned for me. But every Christmas Eve since, I can't help but wonder how close I came to becoming someone's nightmare. Snow fell in a hushed symphony, blanketing the world in an unsettling silence. Inside our home, the warmth of Christmas lights cast a cozy glow over the dining room. The scent of roasted turkey and spiced cider lingered in the air as my family, Mom, Dad, my younger sister Sarah, and I gathered around the table. Outside, the world seemed calm, but the kind of calm that felt fragile. The knock came just as Sarah reached for her second slice of pie. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor or the familiar knock of a friend. It was deliberate, heavy, almost commanding. "Who on earth could that be?" Mom said, her smile fading as she rose from her chair. We weren't expecting anyone. It was Christmas Eve, and our home was miles from the nearest neighbor. Dad got up, his movements cautious. He opened the door just enough to peek outside, and a rush of icy air swept through the room. Standing there, shrouded in snow and shadow, was a man. His parka was frayed, his boots worn, and his beard patchy. His face was rough and weathered, but it was his eyes that made me uneasy, darting, calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice trembling slightly, though whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. "My car broke down a few miles back. Can I use your phone to call for a tow?" Dad hesitated, his hand tightening on the door frame, but Mom, ever the generous soul, ushered him in. "Of course you must be freezing. Come in, come in." The man stepped inside, shaking snow from his boots. He glanced around the room as if memorizing every detail. "Thank you," he said, his smile tight and unconvincing. "It's so quiet out here. Hard to find a house with lights on. You've got a lovely family." Something about the way he said that sent a chill down my spine. Dad handed him the cordless phone, and we all tried to carry on as if nothing was wrong. But I couldn't help stealing glances at him as he spoke, or rather, pretended to. His voice was low, almost inaudible, and when he hung up, he said, "Tow company says it'll be about an hour. You'll wait here where it's warm," Mom insisted, despite the unease hanging heavy in the room. She fixed him a plate, but as he sat with us, something felt off. He ate slowly, his hands trembling as he gripped the fork. His eyes lingered too long on Sarah, who was only 15, and his questions felt intrusive. "Where do you work? How long have you lived here? Do your neighbors live close by?" Dad tried to keep the conversation light, but I could see the tension in his jaw. When an hour passed and no tow truck arrived, Dad reached for the phone. "Let me call them again," he said. "No." The man's voice was sharp, almost a bark, and the room went still. Realizing his outburst, he forced a laugh. "I mean, it's Christmas Eve. They're probably just running behind. I'll wait a little longer." Dad didn't push, but his eyes flicked toward the hallway where he kept his hunting rifle. The man's behavior grew stranger. He barely touched the second plate Mum served him, instead tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, his eyes darting to the windows, the doors. "I think I'll step outside for a smoke," he finally said, standing abruptly. "You don't have to," Mum started, but Dad cut her off. "Let him." The man grabbed his coat and stepped onto the porch. Dad followed, locking the door behind him. "What's going on?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know," I said, my stomach twisting, "but something's not right." Through the window, I watched the man pace back and forth, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. He glanced at the driveway, then at the woods, then back at the house. He didn't seem like someone waiting for a tow truck. After a few tense minutes, he stomped down the snowy road, disappearing into the night without another word. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Dad drove to the nearest gas station to ask about the tow company. The attendant frowned when Dad described the man. "No one called for a tow last night," he said. "Haven't seen anyone walking in from that direction either." Unease settled over us as we pieced things together. The man had lied about the call, and the way he'd studied our house, our family, it was as if he'd been planning something. Later that afternoon, Dad checked the porch. Beneath the freshly fallen snow were cigarette butts, far more than the man could have smoked in the few minutes he'd stood outside. It was as if he'd been there much longer than we realized, watching. We double-checked the locks on every door and window. Dad even installed a new deadbolt on the front door. The man never came back, but for the rest of that winter, every knock at the door sent a chill down my spine.